He didn't say much, didn't laugh loud, didn't chase the spotlight. He wore the same gray hoodie every day, walked the same hallway with his eyes steady and his head low. To most students at Wellington Prep, Kendrick Moore was just another quiet black kid, easy to overlook, easier to underestimate. But behind that silence was something more, a presence, a weight, a truth the school wasn't ready for. They thought he didn't belong, thought his silence meant weakness, thought the hoodie meant danger. They were wrong because Kendrick wasn't invisible. He was watching, he was learning, and when the time came, he didn't need to shout to make them listen. This is a story about what happens when quiet refuses to be erased, when dignity becomes its own defense, and when a hoodie isn't a threat, it's a statement. In a world where people still judge a black boy by what he wears instead of what he carries, Kendrick's journey reminds us that strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just walks in, unbothered, unapologetic, unmoving. Welcome to Silent Power Stories, where we tell real, raw, and dramatic narratives that challenge stereotypes and reveal what quiet resistance truly looks like. This story isn't just about Kendrick. It's about every student who's ever been silenced. Every kid who was told to stay in their place. Every person whose strength was measured by how well they stayed quiet, when in fact their silence was power. So if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or misunderstood, this one's for you. Stay with us because this story, it doesn't explode. It echoes and it will change the way you see silence forever. You wouldn't notice him at first, that was the point. Every morning, Wellington Prep echoed with the sounds of polished shoes clicking against marble floors, locker doors slamming with precision, and conversations about ski trips, Ivy League legacies, and silent auctions for charity. And in the middle of all that noise, Kendrick Moore just walked, no flashy entrance, no designer backpack or limited edition sneakers, just a gray hoodie, a pair of worn jeans, and a silence so heavy it swallowed the hallway. He didn't speak unless necessary, didn't make eye contact unless required. He moved like fog present, but always just outside of notice. But if you did notice, really looked, you'd realize Kendrick wasn't scared. He wasn't lost. He was in control. His steps were deliberate, slow but sure, like he was measuring every inch of that gleaming tile floor beneath him. His eyes dark and alert flicked from door to door, hallway to hallway, not in panic but in assessment, as if he were tracking more than just time between classes, as if he were trained to read the rhythm of a place and never interrupt it unless he had to. To the other kids at Wellington, Kendrick was a question mark in human form, tall, quiet, black, a transfer student with no legacy, no famous last name, and most importantly, no alliances. He didn't try to fit in, didn't need to, because Kendrick Moore wasn't there to belong, he was there to disappear. At Wellington Prep, disappearing wasn't easy. The school itself was a modern-day castle for the rich and nearly royal red brick walls, glass atriums, classical sculptures in the garden, a place where lunch options included sushi chefs and farm-to-table menus. And the Wi-Fi was faster than most hospitals, but beneath all that shine, there were rules not written in the handbook, but etched into every sideways glance and sneering chuckle in the hallway. Rule number one, if your last name wasn't plastered on the science wing or the art center, you were nobody. Rule number two, nobody doesn't talk back. Nobody keeps their head down. Nobody wears the same hoodie every damn day. And Kendrick, he broke all three rules by just walking through the door. The whispers started early. Who's the new guy? Is he from public school? Did we even have a scholarship for that? They didn't say black, not out loud. But Kendrick had heard the code his whole life. He recognized the slight uptick in tone, the fake smile with too much teeth, the way lockers got just a little quieter when he walked by, and he ignored it. Not out of fear, but out of practice. There's something unsettling about someone who doesn't react, especially when you want them to. By second week, Tristan Rockford had taken notice. He always did. Tristan was the sun in Wellington's solar system. Every orbit revolved around him. Quarterback of the football team, son of State Senator William Rockford, bearer of cheekbones sharp enough to slice tension and arrogance deep enough to drown in. He wasn't mean. At least that's what people told themselves. He was just used to being obeyed. Tristan had a sixth sense for weakness. The way someone flinched when bumped, the nervous chuckle when his friends made a joke at their expense, the silence after he passed in the hallway, tense, reverent silence. But Kendrick Moore didn't give him that. Didn't flinch, didn't chuckle, didn't even pause. And that made Tristan itch. The first bump came on a Wednesday, between third and fourth period. Kendrick turned a corner, and Tristan's shoulder clipped him hard, too hard to be accidental. The books in Kendrick's hand slipped, fell to the floor with a dull slap. Tristan didn't stop. His voice carried over his shoulder loud enough to echo. "Careful, bro. These halls aren't built for slow traffic." The group around him laughed, short, sharp, obedient. Kendrick bent down, picked up his books, didn't say a word. He just walked away. And that silence, it wasn't weakness, it was a mirror. And when someone like Tristan looks into a mirror, they don't like what they see. Kendrick Moore didn't come from nowhere. He came from everywhere. Silence is required to survive. Back in East Lenox, nobody walked the streets after midnight unless they had business boots or a bulletproof reason. And Kendrick had grown up learning how to move like a rumor, heard, maybe felt, but never confirmed. His mother was a nurse, 12-hour shifts, 3 jobs. The kind of woman who didn't sleep as much as she blinked longer. His father. That's where it gets complicated. Wellington thought Kendrick was just some inner-city kid who lucked into a scholarship, a walking diversity box. But behind Kendrick's last name was a shadow, Derek Moore. To the world, a retired logistics consultant. To those who really knew a man who once moved things across borders that never showed up on maps. Drugs, weapons, information, whatever needed to be, where it didn't belong. Now he was clean. Officially, unofficially, he was the kind of man whose silence was more dangerous than most people's rage. Kendrick didn't brag about it, didn't name drop, didn't need to. His father had raised him to believe that power didn't have to announce itself. You just had to be still long enough and people would feel it. Wellington Prep didn't know all that. They didn't care either. To them, Kendrick was an anomaly, like a chess piece that appeared in the middle of the board without anyone remembering the move that got him there. He didn't join clubs, didn't run for student council, didn't eat lunch in the cafeteria unless it was nearly empty. But he watched always. He had learned long ago that if you listened enough, the world would tell on itself. Every week, he made mental notes of who sat where, who laughed too loud, who kept glancing over their shoulder, and who only smiled when cameras were on. Wellington was a machine built on masks and Kendrick. He didn't play that game. He played a longer one. He kept a notebook, not the kind with math problems or history notes. This one had no name on the cover. Just blank ruled pages filled with observations. Tristan Rockford needs to be seen. Laugh too long. Insecurity keeps checking phone. Someone he's trying to impress. Fear of being invisible. Weakness. Principal Langdon favors legacy students. Glances at ring finger when nervous. Takes notes during assemblies, even when he pretends not to care. Probably recording conversations. Madison Cho sharp quiet, possibly watching same way I am. Kendrick didn't write these things to be cruel. He wrote them to stay ahead. In his old life, being ahead meant being alive. In this one, it meant survival of a different kind. He didn't hate Wellington, he just didn't believe in it. Didn't believe in the grins that vanished when backs were turned. Didn't believe in teachers who praised diversity but never asked about Kendrick's name. Didn't believe in Tristan Rockford's charity selfies with kids in neighborhoods he wouldn't dare drive through without security. Every time Kendrick walked through those glass double doors, he felt like he was stepping into a world auditioning for its own reality show. Everyone pretending except him, and that scared people. There's a price to silence, and Kendrick paid it every day. No one asked to sit with him. No one saved him a seat. No one said his name unless it was in a roll call or whispered like a warning. But Kendrick didn't need company. He needed clarity. He ate alone, walked alone. But in his silence, he wasn't isolated. He was focused. He watched how power moved, how authority didn't shout but suggested, how dominance wasn't declared, it was felt. And when you grow up watching your father make entire rooms freeze with a single glance, you learn what real power looks like. There was one teacher, though, Mr. Dorsey, AP Lit. Old school mixed race, wore bow ties like armor. He didn't call Kendrick out, didn't try to fix him like the guidance counselor did. Instead, one day after class, he slid a copy of The Invisible Man across Kendrick's desk, said nothing, just nodded once and walked away. Kendrick took the book home, read it that night, and underlined a sentence that made his hand freeze mid-page. I am invisible understands simply because people refuse to see me. He stared at the words for a long time, then quietly added his own. Let them keep refusing. I'll be seen when I choose to be. By Friday, Tristan Rockford had a new obsession. It wasn't winning Friday night's game. It wasn't Madison Cho's attention, though he'd spent most of junior year chasing it. It was Kendrick Moore. The boy in the hoodie who refused to flinch. Tristan didn't understand it, and worse, he couldn't control it. And for a guy like Tristan, that was more than frustrating. It was infuriating, because control was his currency. It was how he ruled Wellington without ever lifting a finger. A smirk, a glance, a whisper behind a hand. That was all it took for someone to fall in line. But Kendrick didn't even look at him. The second accidental collision happened after lunch. Another hallway, another moment. This time Tristan didn't just bump him, he shouldered him. Hard. Kendrick's back hit the locker behind him. There was a metal clang sharp enough to turn a few heads. Tristan stood there, smiling. I think your balance is off, man. Maybe it's the cheap shoes, he said loud enough for the bystanders to catch it. Some snickered, others just looked away. Kendrick slowly adjusted the strap on his backpack. He didn't respond. He didn't move for several seconds. He just stared at the locker next to him, blank dented metal. Then he looked at Tristan. 1 second, 2. A slow blink. Not angry, not scared, just tired. And then Kendrick walked away. That should have been the end of it. But silence to someone like Tristan wasn't surrender. It was defiance. It was an insult, so Tristan kept pushing. He started showing up where Kendrick studied, cutting into conversations that didn't involve him, making snide remarks in class about certain students being awfully quiet for a reason. The room would laugh. Kendrick never joined in, but he didn't leave either. He stayed, took notes, listened, and that was the scariest part. He didn't leave. There's a difference between being invisible and being untouchable, and slowly, very slowly, people started to sense it. There was a moment, small, barely noticeable, in Mr. Dorsey's class. Tristan had made another crack. Something about Kendrick's hoodie in gang fashion, and before the teacher could say anything, Madison Cho from the front row turned her head just slightly and said, "Isn't that the third time you've mentioned his clothes this week?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean. Tristan blinked. People looked around. A few even smiled at Kendrick. He didn't react, but he noticed him. After that, the dynamic shifted just a little. People didn't stop Tristan, but they stopped laughing as quickly, stopped echoing his jokes with that same hungry energy. A few started watching Kendrick differently, not with pity, not with suspicion, with curiosity. Because here was a black kid in a hoodie saying nothing, and somehow saying everything. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't breaking, and he sure as hell wasn't afraid. The cafeteria was next. Kendrick always sat alone. Back corner, tray balanced on one hand, notebook in the other. He never raised his voice, never asked for a seat. But that Friday a new wrinkle appeared. As he walked toward his usual table, someone was already sitting there. Tristan, legs stretched out, arms folded, a grin like he was about to win something. Kendrick paused just for a moment. Then he turned, walked 3 tables down and sat at another spot, just as calm, just as composed. Didn't argue, didn't challenge, but the message landed anyway. You can take the table, but not the ground I stand on. It wasn't dramatic. No fights, no viral moments, no cafeteria brawl, just a boy in a hoodie walking on his own terms. And that made him dangerous, not to everyone, but to the right people, the ones who needed silence to mean submission. Because Kendrick's silence wasn't passive, it was power, it was legacy, even if no one could see it yet. By the time the bell rang for last period, Tristan was pacing. His charm was wearing thin, his control slipping. He threw a basketball too hard during warm-ups, snapped at his coach, ignored his girlfriend, and when someone asked what was wrong, he just muttered, "Nothing, just a kid who thinks he's untouchable." But deep down, even Tristan didn't believe that anymore, because it wasn't just about Kendrick ignoring him. It was that the whole school was starting to wonder, what if Kendrick Moore wasn't just another scholarship kid? What if the silence he carried was louder than any shout? It started with whispers, the kind that float just behind your ear, never quite loud enough to confront but sharp enough to slice Kendrick's, probably not even his real name. I heard he got in on some urban outreach program. Bet he's from a neighborhood where cops don't even bother showing up. Tristan didn't say these things out loud. Not directly, he was smarter than that. No, he let others carry the words for him. It was an old trick his father had taught him, how to destroy someone's reputation without ever touching them. You don't need to throw a punch, William Rockford once said over dinner wine, glass half raised. You just plant the right seed, let weak minds water it, and Wellington Prep had plenty of gardeners. By Monday, the rumors had a rhythm. Kendrick Moore was dangerous. Kendrick Moore was a liar. Kendrick Moore didn't belong. The most popular group chat in school, WPRE Lite, was suddenly full of jokes about Kendrick's hoodie mafia, about how he was scouting the school for a Netflix special, about how he must be wired. Someone even photoshopped a school ID of Kendrick with a barcode over his eyes, caption, "Transfer of interest, dozens of likes. Laugh emojis, thumbs up." No one asked Kendrick. No one ever does. He didn't respond, didn't flinch, but he saw it. In history class, Kendrick sat 2 rows behind Tristan. That day when the teacher turned to write on the board, a piece of folded paper landed on Kendrick's desk. He didn't touch it, didn't even look at it, but his jaw tightened. From behind, Tristan smirked. The message was simple, scrawled in jagged Sharpie ink. Not your turf. After class, Kendrick walked past Tristan in the hallway, didn't say a word, didn't even glance. And that silence, that drove Tristan mad. It wasn't just defiance now, it was disrespect. Tristan had spent his whole life being the center of attention, and Kendrick Moore was stealing that without even trying. He had to do something more. He had to make Kendrick react. The locker incident happened Tuesday morning. Hallways, full eyes everywhere, the perfect setup. As Kendrick opened his locker, Tristan approached from behind. Fast calculated, he slammed the metal door shut. Hard, the echo rang out down the corridor. Some students jumped, a few looked over. Most just watched. Tristan leaned in close. His voice was a low growl, sharp and smooth like broken glass. "Want to know something funny?" he whispered. "No one here cares what you think. You're just a Stat A quota. They'll forget your name the second you graduate. Kendrick slowly reopened the locker, calm, like Tristan hadn't said a thing. He reached in, took out a notebook, closed it, then turned. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Kendrick spoke. 2 words, soft, clear. Keep talking. Tristan blinked. The tone wasn't a threat, wasn't anger, it was a promise. And that scared him more than he cared to admit. By lunch, Tristan had something bigger planned. He wasn't going to just poke the bear anymore. He was going to rip the silence out of Kendrick by force. He wanted witnesses. He wanted attention. He wanted the whole school to watch. So he picked the cafeteria, mid-lunch, every table packed. Kendrick walked in tray in hand, hoodie up. Same seat as always, back corner. But today, as he approached his table, he saw it. His seat was taken, not by Tristan this time, but by a group of football players laughing loud, blocking the whole row. Kendrick didn't pause. He walked to another table, set down his tray, opened his notebook, didn't complain, didn't ask for the seat back. That only made it worse. Tristan stood up, walked over, and in one clean, deliberate motion, he picked up Kendrick's lunch tray and dropped it right in front of him. Sandwich fruit water all over the floor. The room went silent. A beat, too. No one moved. Tristan looked around, waiting for the laugh, but it didn't come. Kendrick stared down at the mess, then looked up at Tristan and said nothing. That was the moment, right there. The silence felt wrong. It wasn't fear. It wasn't surrender. It was the sound of someone choosing not to fight because they didn't need to. Tristan felt it in his chest. A flicker. Not guilt, but something close to panic. He turned back to his table, laughing louder than necessary. Relax. It's just a joke, he called to no one in particular. I'm helping him build character, but no one replied. And across the room, Kendrick reached down, picked up his tray, what was left of it, and walked away, step by step. No hurry, and as he walked, hoodie-up notebook still tucked under his arm, everyone saw him. For the first time, they really saw him. The silence didn't fade. If anything, it grew louder. That cafeteria moment didn't just humiliate Kendrick. It unsettled the school. Because something about the way he walked away, untouched by it, made people question what kind of story they were really watching. At Wellington, prep drama was currency. Every hallway carried echoes of last night's gossip, who hooked up, who messed up, who cried in the bathroom, and who got caught cheating before midterms. So when Kendrick Moore didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't break, people didn't know what to do with that. Some said he was weird. Others said he was planning something, but the ones who really paid attention, they just got quiet around him, not out of pity, out of respect, and that scared Tristan more than anything. He started pushing harder. It wasn't enough to spill a tray or drop a few jokes. Tristan needed to shatter whatever armor Kendrick was wearing. So he went digital. Screenshots from Kendrick's social media, old pictures, out of context quotes, even blurry posts that could be twisted into something sinister started circulating through the school. It didn't matter if it was real, it only mattered that it spread. One meme showed Kendrick in his hoodie, eyes half shadowed. Caption, security alert suspect on campus. Another, a doctored image of Kendrick with red laser eyes, and the text, trust me bro, I'm just here to learn. It was high school cruelty wrapped in filters and fonts, harmless to some, poison to others, and all through it, Kendrick stayed quiet. Ms. Chambers, the guidance counselor, called him in. She meant well, but her voice was too soft. Her words too practiced, Kendrick. I just wanted to check in. We've been hearing a lot, and I want to make sure you feel safe here. Kendrick looked at her long enough for the silence to make her shift in her seat. Then he answered, I'm not here to feel safe. He said, I'm here to graduate. She blinked. Oh, well, still, you should know there are resources if you... I know where the door is, he said, And with that, he stood, thanked her, and walked out. Just like that. In the gym locker room, Tristan's teammates started to pull back. They weren't saints, but they knew when something was off. Man, maybe leave it alone. One said, he's not even reacting. Feels kind of forced now. But Tristan didn't stop because it wasn't about Kendrick anymore. It was about control. And the longer Kendrick didn't break, the more Tristan felt like he was the one falling apart. By Thursday, Kendrick's name had been whispered in every hallway. Not in fear. In curiosity, people started noticing what he wasn't doing. He wasn't trying to win anyone over, wasn't playing the victim, wasn't running. He just kept moving class to class, hoodie up, notebook in hand, and in a place built on performance. His silence had become performance art. That afternoon, something small happened. At Kendrick's usual lunch table, the one that had been taken over earlier in the week, someone was sitting again. Not a jock, not a bully, just a girl from AP Chem. Name tag still on her lanyard, earbuds and sketching something in her notebook. When Kendrick approached, she looked up. Didn't move, didn't speak, just slid her tray an inch to the left. Just enough room for his. He sat, didn't thank her, didn't need to. They just ate in silence. Two ghosts sharing space. Tristan saw it, saw the moment from across the room and felt a new kind of anger, one he didn't have words for. Because in his mind, Kendrick was supposed to be crushed, broken, gone, not gaining ground, not being seen. So after lunch, he made his next move. Not subtle, not clever, just rage dressed up as logic. He pulled Kendrick's name from the school directory, found his schedule, found out what clubs he'd signed up for, none, what electives he was in, advanced literature, computer science, and ethics. And that last one. That was too good to ignore. Tristan showed up to ethics uninvited, claiming to be doing a peer project on conflict resolution. The teacher caught off guard. Let him stay. Tristan sat right across from Kendrick, front row, hands clasped, smiling. And when the teacher asked a question about justice and retribution, Tristan raised his hand. Well, I think when someone refuses to take responsibility for their presence, they invite consequences, and sometimes silence can be the loudest form of disrespect. The class went still. The teacher frowned, confused by the passive aggression in the statement. Kendrick didn't blink. He just turned a page in his notebook and underlined a sentence. Once, twice. The pen didn't shake, the eyes didn't lift. But Tristan felt it. He wasn't winning anymore. He was being watched. By Friday morning. The temperature at Wellington Prep wasn't just rising outside. Inside the school, tension moved through the halls like heat off asphalt. Visible wavering, real Kendrick felt it before he stepped into the building. The way the security guard didn't nod like he used to. The way a sophomore girl looked down too quickly when he passed. The way his locker door felt heavier, like something was waiting behind it. He opened it. Nothing inside at first, then he saw the envelope. No name, just taped to the inside of the door. He peeled it off, opened it. Inside, a single printed photo, a still image of him walking into school, hoodie up, head down. Someone had drawn red circles around his face and scrawled, "How long until he snaps?" No note, no explanation. Just that he stared at it for a long moment, then folded it, placed it in his notebook and walked to class. Meanwhile, Tristan sat in the media lab, clicking through images with a slow grin. He didn't send the photo, but he knew who did. And that was enough. The campaign had grown past him now. It had momentum. Kendrick wasn't just a kid in a hoodie anymore. He was a story, one that people could project fear, judgment, and ridicule onto without ever having to speak his name. He was a blank screen they could throw their shadows against. And Tristan, he loved it. He didn't need to be the villain, just the narrator. That afternoon, the school posted a new announcement. Monday would be Unity Week. A response to recent tensions and student discomfort, there would be panels, guest speakers, and a mandatory assembly to discuss inclusion and identity in a changing world. It didn't mention Kendrick. It didn't have to. The message was clear. Something had been disturbed, and instead of stopping the bully, they were going to ask the victim to help explain the wound. During seventh period, Kendrick sat in the back of ethics again. Tristan showed up early, took the front row. The teacher asked a question about systems of power. Tristan raised his hand. Well, sometimes power doesn't look like violence or shouting. He said, his voice calm, public. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's manipulation. And sometimes it's a refusal to participate in the community. A few students nodded, unsure. The teacher tilted her head. And what do we do in those cases? Tristan smiled. We make sure silence doesn't feel safe. When the bell rang, Kendrick didn't move. He stayed in his seat, letting the room clear out around him. The teacher watched him from her desk. She didn't say anything, didn't ask questions, but she didn't look away. When he finally stood, he walked straight out the door, hoodie up step by step, down the hallway, past the lockers, past the eyes, until he reached the west stairwell, usually empty, except today it wasn't. Today there were 3 guys from the football team. One of them filming, another holding a phone up like a boom mic. Tristan was waiting at the bottom step. KJ, he said loud and friendly, like they were friends. Come down here, man. Got a question for you. Kendrick didn't answer. Tristan took a step closer. People want to know why you so quiet. What are you hiding under that hood, huh? He chuckled. The guy filming snorted. You think this school owes you something? Or are you just walking around collecting sympathy points? Kendrick descended 1 step, then another slow controlled. He stopped 5 steps up eye level with Tristan. Then he asked without emotion. You done? Tristan blinked. I what? You done talking? Kendrick asked again. Tristan clenched his jaw. What's your problem, man? You think you're better than us? Kendrick didn't answer, just stared, and in that silence, something broke. Tristan stepped forward, shoved him, not hard, but hard enough. The phone camera caught it. Kendrick didn't fall, didn't stumble, didn't blink. He just stepped back onto the same stair, balanced still. And then he did the one thing Tristan hadn't expected. He smiled, not wide, not cruel, just enough. Then he turned around and walked back up the stairs. No words, no warning, just that damn hoodie disappearing around the corner, and Tristan. For the first time all week, he didn't feel powerful, he felt seen. Later that night, the video hit social media, titled Football. Captain Bully's quiet kid gets ignored like a ghost. By morning, it had 20,000 views. By lunch, it had 100,000. No one tagged Kendrick, but everyone knew in Tristan he was just getting started. Because next, he'd make it public. He'd make it cruel, and Kendrick more. He'd be ready, he always was. Monday morning arrived cold and cloudless. But inside Wellington Prep, the atmosphere was anything but clear. Students shuffled into the auditorium for the Unity. Week assembly required attendance. Assigned seating, no excuses. Teachers tried to wear their concerned mentor faces. Administrators pretended the room wasn't already vibrating with tension. And Kendrick Moore. He sat near the back. Same hoodie, same stillness. Nothing about him seemed different, except maybe the weight in the air around his chair. The kind of weight people feel when they realize they've misjudged something or someone. Up front, the stage was set for open dialogue. A circle of chairs, a moderator from the diversity committee, 2 students from the Black Student Alliance, 1 kid from the debate club, and because no show is complete without irony, Tristan Rockford, he'd volunteered, said he wanted to contribute, said he had some thoughts on accountability. No one challenged him because Wellington didn't know how to say no to the Rockfords. Tristan walked onto the stage like it was his field. He wore a Letterman jacket, he held a wireless mic, and he smiled that practiced charismatic smile that always made parents think he'll be a senator one day. He sat crossed one leg and waited for his cue. It came fast. The moderator opened with a question. What does it mean to belong in a place like Wellington? One of the students gave a solid, rehearsed answer. Something about community and tradition. Another spoke from the heart, shared a moment when she felt isolated for speaking Spanish in class. The crowd nodded, then Tristan took the mic and smiled. Well, he said voice loud and smooth, I think. Belonging also means earning your place. It's not just about being here, it's about how you act while you're here. A few murmurs, teachers leaned forward. See, he continued. Some students think being quiet gives them immunity, that if they just don't engage, no one will question them. But silence is a choice. He looked right at Kendrick. Didn't name him, didn't have to, and sometimes that choice tells us everything. A few kids laughed, uneasy, low. Others looked back toward Kendrick. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't even blink. The moderator tried to redirect. Let's stay on topic. But Tristan cut in. No, I think this is the topic. We've got people walking around like ghosts hiding behind hoods and notebooks, acting like being misunderstood. Makes them powerful. He stood. Let's talk about that. Silence. Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind. The kind that rolls in like a storm and makes everyone sit straighter. Tristan didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. He walked toward the edge of the stage. And let's be real, he said, pacing now, when one student refuses to participate in anything, no sports, no clubs, no spirit weeks, nothing. What are they saying to the rest of us? He turned, eyes landing again on Kendrick. They're saying, I'm above all this. More heads turned. More eyes shifted back. Kendrick didn't move, but the tension around him tightened. And then Tristan did it. He pulled out his phone, held it up to the crowd. Some of you might have seen this already, he said, but for the ones who haven't, here's what we're dealing with. He tapped the screen, airdropped the file. Within seconds, phones buzzed all over the auditorium. Some hesitated, some opened it. What they saw, a photo, heavily edited. Kendrick's face distorted, eyes glowing, hoodie darkened to near black. Text above it, threat level, silent laughter. Uneasy at first, then louder. Even some teachers chuckled, confused, unsure. Tristan looked satisfied. This isn't bullying, he said. This is humor. This is perspective. But the moderator stood Tristan, and then a voice from the back cut through the auditorium, sharp, clear, calm. Play the video. Everyone turned. Kendrick had spoken. The room froze. What video? Tristan shot back, caught off guard. Kendrick stood up, walked down the center aisle. No rush. He pulled out his phone, raised it. The one from the stairwell, he said. Where you shoved me, where you called me a parasite, where your boy filmed it because you thought it was funny. He held the phone high. Play that one. Gasps, movement. A few students near the tech booth started checking their phones. Someone had already uploaded it. It was there. A video of Tristan's voice, angry, cruel, his shove, his words, his face unfiltered, unedited. Suddenly the laughter died. Tristan's face turned flushed, flickering between anger and fear. And Kendrick, he just stood there, still quiet. But no one in that room missed the shift. He didn't have to yell, didn't have to shame. He had the truth. And the room finally heard him. The video hit harder than anyone expected. Not because of what was said. People had heard worse, but because it peeled back the polish, it exposed something raw, unfiltered, undeniable. And it did it in front of everyone. Faculty, staff, students, parents who'd shown up early to meet with the dean. No one could unsee it. After the assembly, the hallways were a mess of whispers. Did you see his face? I didn't know Kendrick even had that footage. Wait, why was Tristan filming in the first place? Dude's done, but Kendrick didn't join the crowd. He slipped out through the side door. No dramatic exit, no smug look, just a steady walk through the open breezeway. Hoodie pulled tight against the wind. Inside the auditorium, the moderator scrambled to regain control, but the damage was done. Tristan stood frozen near the edge of the stage, shoulders locked. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't the loudest voice in the room. He wasn't even being heard. In the following classes, something changed. People started noticing Kendrick in a new way, not as a mystery, not as a threat, but as a constant. He wasn't loud. He didn't make announcements. But every time he walked into a room, the energy shifted, not with fear, with focus. Teachers called on him more carefully, respectfully. Classmates gave him space. Some nodded when they passed him in the hallway, and he never broke stride. Tristan, on the other hand, began to shrink. He wasn't used to silence working against him. He'd built his identity on attention, on being the guy everyone either wanted to be or feared crossing. But now eyes watched him with doubt. Whispers followed him in the locker room. Someone scrawled "silencer" on his gym locker in red marker. At first, he tried to fight it. He laughed louder. Posted selfies with captions like "Unity, not division." Even donated a box of used football gear to the outreach center downtown. But the damage had been done. This time, the narrative wasn't his. Kendrick sat in Mr. Dorsey's class that afternoon, third row from the back, the book on the desk in front of him, Native Son. His pen traced the corner of the page, not doodling. Thinking Mr. Dorsey paused during the lesson, looked directly at Kendrick. "Mr. Moore," he said, "you got a thought." Kendrick looked up, then closed the book. "I think people like to label what they don't understand," he said. "And when those labels don't work anymore, they panic." The class went quiet. Someone near the front nodded. Tristan, sitting near the window, stared out at the courtyard. Didn't say a word. By the end of the week, the school had held 3 meetings. Not about Kendrick, about Tristan. His parents showed up, so did their lawyer. The administration was careful, diplomatic, but the phrase "code of conduct violation" hung in the air like a fog. They couldn't expel him, not yet, but the suspension was real, so was the lost captainship. The fall wasn't immediate. It never is, but it had begun. Kendrick never gloated, never raised his voice, never called a press conference. But one afternoon as he passed Tristan near the senior lockers, their eyes met. Tristan tried to hold the stare, but Kendrick, he didn't stop, didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just walked. And for Tristan, that was worse than a punch, because it meant he didn't matter anymore. Not to Kendrick, not to the school, not to the story. Back in ethics class, the final project was announced, a presentation on justice and identity. Volunteers would go first. Kendrick didn't raise his hand, but the teacher looked at him. "You have something to say?" Kendrick paused, then nodded. "Yeah," he said, "I think it's time." The classroom held its breath, not because they expected a performance, but because they knew they were about to hear something real. And in a place like Wellington, that was rare. Kendrick stood, notebook in hand, hoodie still on, and when he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Because finally, they were all listening. Kendrick stood in front of the classroom, notebook, open pen tucked behind his ear. He didn't pace, didn't clear his throat, didn't adjust the hoodie that had become part of his armor. He just stood there, still steady, and then he spoke. "I was taught that silence can be strength." He began, voice calm, measured, "but I've also learned that sometimes silence is mistaken for weakness, for consent, for guilt." A few heads nodded, no one looked away. He glanced down at his notebook, but didn't read from it. "When I came to this school, I wasn't looking to make noise. I wasn't trying to stand out. I was trying to survive in a place that wasn't made for me." You could hear the ventilation hum. You could hear people breathe. Every hallway I walk, every look I get, It tells me that I'm being measured, watched, expected to slip. His eyes lifted, but I didn't come here to slip. In the back of the room, a girl raised her hand. Madison Cho, do you think what happened to you was because of your silence or because of who you are? Kendrick didn't blink. Both another pause. He stepped closer to the front row. It's easy to say, don't judge a book by its cover. But most of you judged me the moment I walked in here with a hoodie and skin that doesn't match your legacy walls. No one moved. I've been called things you'll never hear in this room. Had assumptions thrown at me faster than answers on a pop quiz. And through all of it, I stayed quiet. He took a breath. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wanted to know who would listen when I finally did. The teacher didn't interrupt, didn't glance at the clock. This wasn't just a class project. This was a reckoning. Tristan sat slumped in the back corner. No phone, no smirk, just silence now. The kind that felt nothing like power. Kendrick looked around the room. This isn't about me versus him, he said. This is about what we normalize, what we excuse, what we call just a joke until someone bleeds. The class went quiet again. He closed his notebook, didn't snap it, just folded it shut. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not asking for applause. I'm just asking you to remember what truth sounds like when it's finally spoken out loud. And with that, he returned to his seat. No mic drop, no final flourish. Just a seat quietly reclaimed. After class, the teacher walked over. You've got something special, Kendrick. He nodded once. Thank you, sir. Then walked out, hoodie still up. In the hallway, a few students stepped aside as he passed. Not out of fear, out of respect. Someone clapped him lightly on the shoulder. Another just said, that was real. He didn't reply. Didn't need to. They were finally hearing him without him having to speak. Across campus, the video from the assembly was still spreading. But now so was Kendrick's speech. Someone had filmed it, posted it, captioned it. When the quiet kid speaks, we listen. It was going viral. Not because it was flashy, but because it was true. That evening, Tristan sat alone in the empty bleachers. Practice had been canceled. His suspension was being reviewed. He looked down at his phone, notifications, messages, silence. The kind of silence he never used to fear until now. Meanwhile, Kendrick sat at the bus stop outside school. Same seat, same rhythm. But now when he looked up, someone was walking toward him. Madison, she didn't say much, just sat beside him. After a while, she asked, so what now? Kendrick thought for a second, then shrugged. Now I keep showing up. She smiled. Good. The bus pulled up, doors hissed open. He stepped inside. She followed, and as it pulled away from Wellington Prep, the sun hit the window just right, catching the edge of his hoodie like a spotlight. Not a warning, not a disguise, but a symbol. A black story finally being seen on his terms. There's a moment in every story where the silence breaks, not because the one holding it finally speaks, but because the world decides it's had enough of not being heard back. Kendrick Moore had earned a voice, the school had heard it, and for a while it looked like maybe that would be enough. But there's something fragile about reputation, especially when it doesn't belong to the system, especially when it's worn on black skin, and especially when it walks around in a hoodie still not smiling for the crowd. Tristan Rockford had disappeared for a few days. Technically, it was called a disciplinary leave. Unofficially, he was nursing a bruised ego and a father's quiet wrath. Senator William Rockford had built his life on image. His son, Golden Boy, all-American Wellington legacy, was not supposed to become the face of a bullying scandal, especially not during re-election year. So the conversation in the Rockford household wasn't about guilt. It was about optics. You lost the room, his father said, pacing with a glass of scotch. Now you take it back, how Tristan had asked. The answer came in a stare, sharp, political, find his weakness, make it loud. By Wednesday morning, something was brewing. People could feel it. Whispers again, but different. not mocking this time. Nervous screenshots, rumors, a new video clip making rounds in encrypted student group chats. But this time it wasn't of Tristan, it was Kendrick. It started as a 10-second clip, grainy zoomed in. Kendrick standing in the parking lot talking to an older man in a black SUV. You couldn't hear the audio, but the man's face was barely visible. Sharp jaw, gray beard, dark sunglasses, and just beneath the tint of the windshield, a gun on the dash. Zoom screenshot, caption, Kendrick's real family business. No wonder he walks like he owns the place. Is this how he got in? Within an hour, the posts exploded on Instagram stories, in anonymous confession forums, on burner Twitter, accounts that scream from behind default avatars, Kendrick's dad is a criminal. Wellington is harboring gang connections. Our safety matters too. And the most viral one, a digitally manipulated photo of Kendrick holding a duffel bag outside school, overlaid with the transfer we never needed. Kendrick saw it during third period. He didn't react. He closed his phone, tucked it back in his bag, but when he looked up, the stares had already started. Even kids who used to nod at him in the hall were suddenly cautious. Some backed away, some didn't look at him at all, because that's how it works. People love the underdog story, but only if the underdog knows how to smile, bow and fade when the spotlight gets too hot. Kendrick, he wasn't smiling, wasn't bowing, wasn't fading, and now they were scared again. He didn't go to lunch that day. Instead, he went to the library. Back corner, the seat facing the door. Always the seat facing the door. He opened his notebook, the one where he wrote things no one would see. This time, though he didn't write, he just sat, thinking not about the video, not even about Tristan. He was thinking about his father. Derek Moore hadn't been to the school since enrollment day. He hadn't needed to be, but Kendrick knew he was watching. And now the line had been crossed. Because that video that wasn't taken by accident, someone had followed them, watched the car zoomed in on the weapon intentionally left visible as a message. And the only person who knew where Derek would be that day was Tristan. After school, Kendrick waited. Not for Tristan, not for the crowd. He waited for the call. It came at 4:12 p.m., block number. He answered. Son, said the voice on the other end. Calm, controlled. Yeah, Kendrick replied. I told you this would happen. Kendrick exhaled. I know. A pause. Then you want me to handle it? Another pause, longer this time. Then Kendrick said, no, I'll handle it myself. Click. He didn't go home that night, not right away. He stayed at school, sat in the empty auditorium, lights off, alone. But not hiding. He wasn't waiting for a stage. He wasn't waiting for applause. He was preparing, because now the rules had changed. And tomorrow, so would the story. The next morning, the dean called Kendrick in, not a guidance counselor, not a teacher. The dean, Dr. Harlan Langston, gray suit, always smelled faintly of leather and expensive compromise. He didn't offer Kendrick a seat, didn't offer water, just pointed. Kendrick sat, still hoodie up. Dr. Langston opened a folder, not because he needed to, but because theatrics mattered at Wellington. He slid a printed image across the desk. It was the screenshot from the video, the SUV, the silhouette of Derek Moore, and the faint outline of a weapon on the dashboard. No caption, but the accusation hung in the air like smoke. We've received several messages from concerned parents, the dean said slowly. He didn't look up. Some of them are suggesting you might pose a threat to student safety. Kendrick said nothing. Langston cleared his throat. As you can imagine, we have to take these concerns seriously. Still, Kendrick didn't speak. The dean sighed. Is there anything you want to say about this situation? Finally, Kendrick leaned forward. Voice calm, unshaken. That's my father. Langston blinked. Kendrick continued. He's a retired federal contractor. He holds a Class 3 concealed carry permit in the state of Virginia. That vehicle is legally registered. The weapon is licensed. Langston opened his mouth, closed it. Kendrick's eyes didn't waver. If you want confirmation, call the Department of Homeland Security. Ask for Deputy Director Derek Moore. Silence. The kind that makes people shift in expensive chairs. Langston sat back, lips pressed together. I see, he said finally. Kendrick didn't move. Was that all, he asked? Langston hesitated, then nodded. Yes, that will be all for now. Kendrick stood, walked out without a glance back. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but the echo it left behind, it was deafening. By lunchtime, word had spread. Not just the truth about the video, but the real identity of the man in the SUV, Deputy Director, Homeland Security, 15 years in high-risk foreign operations. Now a civilian advisor to the FAA in the Department of Transportation, and Kendrick Moore. He wasn't just anybody's son. He was the son of a man with silent credentials and power you couldn't Google. Tristan heard it in whispers. He was at his locker when one of the football guys passed by and muttered under his breath, "You picked the wrong kid." Tristan turned, but the guy was already gone. Another student posted, "Imagine trying to frame the son of a federal official and thinking you wouldn't be the one exposed." The caption went viral, not with memes, with facts, receipts, screenshots, even an alumni thread chiming in, and then came the call to the Rockford family. From Senator Rockford's campaign manager, "We've got a problem," the voice said. In the cafeteria, Kendrick sat alone again. But this time the seat wasn't about isolation. It was about intention. People were watching again. Yes, but now the fear had shifted. They weren't afraid of what Kendrick might do. They were afraid of what he already knew. Because he hadn't yelled, hadn't threatened, hadn't fought back. And yet, the narrative had flipped, all without him raising his voice. Madison sat down across from him. No words at first, just quiet. Then finally she said, "They're terrified of you." Now Kendrick didn't smile, didn't look up. "Good," he said. Not because he wanted fear, but because fear was the only language some people understood. That afternoon, Principal Holloway called an emergency staff meeting. Some were nervous, others angry, but the message was clear. We let this get out of control, and now we're no longer writing the story. The students are. The teachers didn't argue, because they all knew it was true. Back in Mr. Dorsey's class, Kendrick took his usual seat. The lesson was on persuasive writing. Mr. Dorsey paused midway through the lecture and glanced at him. "Kendrick," he said, "if you had to give this class one sentence to sum up the last week, what would it be?" Kendrick lifted his head, met his teacher's eyes, then said, "They tried to speak for me, so I gave them nothing to echo." Mr. Dorsey nodded. "That'll do." In the class, they didn't clap. They just sat there soaking it in. Because that's what happens when truth walks quietly into the room. It doesn't ask permission, it simply sits down. And waits. The next morning there was a heaviness in the halls at Wellington Prep. Not the usual kind, the post-exam slump or senior year drift. No, this weight was different. It pressed on lockers, hung from ceilings, sat in inboxes. It was the kind of weight that comes after truth gets too big to ignore. Tristan hadn't shown up for first period. By second, he was there, but quieter than usual. Hoodie over his own head this time. Eyes low, voice gone. He had become the thing he used to mock a ghost in the crowd. But ghosts don't just vanish. Not if they're cornered. And Tristan, he wasn't going out silently. He had one move left, and it was the dirtiest one yet. Around 11:45 a.m., a message hit the school-wide student email list, anonymous sender. No subject line inside a PDF attachment titled, "More Files." It spread fast, too fast for the administration to catch it in time. The file was a compilation, screenshots, images, and half-redacted documents, claims that Kendrick's father had once been involved in confidential operations overseas, allegations of excessive use of force, classified involvement in foreign detainment programs, and connections to black site logistics. None of it confirmed, none of it new. But to the students scrolling, it was gold, especially the line highlighted in yellow subject known to have access to surveillance-grade resources. Translation in kid speak, his dad's a spy. The reactions were instant. Some students leaned in closer to Kendrick in fear. Others backed away in paranoia. Whispers exploded again. He's watching us. What if he has cameras? What if we're next? One post on the school's private forum read, "It's not Kendrick we're afraid of. It's the power behind him." But Kendrick, he didn't open the email, didn't scroll, didn't take the bait. He knew exactly what it was, a desperate swing, a final gasp from someone who had already lost the room. Tristan had gone too far, and this time, somebody else noticed him. Principal Holloway stood in front of the faculty at 2:00 p.m. sharp. "We're no longer talking about bullying," he said. "This is now a case of targeted harassment, digital defamation, and student endangerment." The words were sharper than usual. Someone had tipped him off, not a student, not a parent. The federal office in D.C., Derek Moore, hadn't made a move. He didn't need to. His network had done the speaking for him. By 3:15 p.m., Tristan was pulled from class. 2 staff members, a security escort. He didn't fight, didn't protest. But as he passed Kendrick in the hallway, eyes still locked under his hoodie, he paused for a second. Tristan almost looked like the kid he might have been before Wellington taught him who to hate. Then he muttered barely loud enough for Kendrick to hear, "You think you won." Kendrick didn't stop walking, didn't slow down. But as he passed, his voice came low and clear. "I didn't have to." At 3:45 p.m., an email hit every inbox again. This time it came from the dean's office. "An investigation has been launched into the unauthorized distribution of fabricated records concerning a Wellington student and their family. Wellington Prep stands by the truth. We reject fear-mongering in all forms." The message was signed in bold by the Board of Trustees. After school, Kendrick sat in the courtyard. Same seat, same posture. Hoodie still up, but now people looked at him differently. Not as a mystery, not as a threat, but as someone who survived something invisible. The kind of battle most people don't even recognize until the smoke clears. Madison joined him again. She handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it. Inside a list of names, students, teachers, one custodian, even a bus driver. All the people who had quietly stood up for him in little ways, moved seats. Deleted posts told the truth when it counted. At the bottom, Madison had written, "You're not alone anymore." Kendrick looked at the names, then at the school beyond the trees. He didn't smile, but his shoulders settled. The line had been crossed, but so had a threshold. The story was no longer just about defense. It was about something bigger now, about what comes after the silence breaks. It wasn't a limo. It wasn't tinted glass and security detail. It was a navy blue truck, old clean. Quiet pulled into the staff parking lot just after noon on a Thursday. Nobody noticed at first, not until he stepped out. Tall, broad shoulders, suit jacket over a black turtleneck. Close-cropped hair, gray at the temples, shoes shined but scuffed just enough to say he wasn't afraid to walk through fire. And the eyes dark heavy, watching everything. He didn't need to introduce himself. The campus air shifted the moment he closed the truck door. Inside the administration building, Principal Holloway stood up as soon as the door opened. So did the dean. So did 2 members of the board who happened to be in the room for unrelated matters. Mr. Moore, the principal said, extending a hand. Derek Moore didn't shake it, not out of rudeness, just preference. "I'd like to speak plainly," he said, voice low, smooth, the kind of calm that made people nervous. "Of course," Holloway nodded. Derek looked around the room. "I kept my distance, not because I was unaware, but because I believe in watching the whole board before moving a piece." The dean shifted in his seat. "We understand, and I want to personally apologize." Derek raised a hand. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for clarity. He placed a folder on the desk. Inside were copies of the slanderous files sent across the school. The ones about Kendrick, about him, about the life he left behind. I've already spoken with federal legal counsel. I'm not here to threaten lawsuits yet. A pause. But if this school doesn't protect my son the way it protects its donors' children, I will assume it never intended to in the first place. Dead silence. Even the Shuchvac seemed to pause. Then Derek leaned forward, voice even lower. My son doesn't need bodyguards. He doesn't need cameras. He doesn't need me stepping in. He looked the dean straight in the eye. But what he will have is respect. Because the next time someone lays a finger on his reputation, I won't be coming here to talk. Meanwhile, Kendrick sat in AP Lit, reading quietly. Notebook is open beside his desk. He didn't know his father was already on campus, didn't know the meeting was happening just down the hall, but somehow he felt it, that silent shift in the atmosphere, like something old and powerful had just entered the room behind a locked door. After the meeting, Derek didn't leave campus. Instead, he walked across the quad. Students watched, some whispered, some stared. They didn't know who he was, but they knew he mattered. He walked straight into Kendrick's classroom, knocked once. The teacher mid-sentence paused. Mr. Dorsey. Kendrick looked up and saw him, his father, in the doorway. Mr. Dorsey stepped aside. Looks like class has a guest. Derek didn't speak right away. He looked at the board, then at the students, then at Kendrick, and nodded. Walk with me. Kendrick didn't hesitate. He closed his notebook, slid it into his bag, and followed. They walked in silence for a while, past the sculpture garden, past the flagpole. Finally, they stopped beneath an old oak tree near the edge of the school. Derek turned. You did good. Kendrick didn't respond at first. Then you think so, I know so. A long pause. Then I didn't want you to come, I know. Derek said another pause. Kendrick looked down. I thought if I handled it myself, maybe they'd respect me more. Derek nodded slowly. They will. Eventually. He looked out across the campus. But make no mistake, respect isn't something you earn from systems like this by being quiet. Kendrick looked up. Surprise, you stayed quiet. Your whole life. Derek's face shifted just slightly. I stayed quiet because that's how I survived. But I never stopped watching, and I never let them think I was weak. He pointed gently toward the buildings. You didn't survive this place. You changed it. That's different. Kendrick let the words settle. And then, just above a whisper, are you proud? Derek didn't smile, didn't speak right away. He just looked his son dead in the eyes. I've been proud since the moment you decided not to let them define your story. He placed a hand on Kendrick's shoulder. But now I'm something else. Kendrick raised an eyebrow. What's that? Derek finally smiled. I'm watching the future. When Derek Moore left campus that day, he didn't leave a trail. No press. No interviews. No threats. He simply disappeared the same way he arrived. Quiet, direct, undeniable. But what he left behind, that stayed in the air. In the walls, in the way people moved when Kendrick walked by now. Because word travels fast at Wellington. And when it came to Derek Moore, it wasn't what people said that mattered. It was what they didn't say. Some called him ex-military, others whispered federal intelligence. Like it was folklore. One student even claimed their uncle worked at DHS and confirmed Derek once advised on counterterrorism strategy. Was it true didn't matter. What mattered was that the school had been forced to reckon with something it rarely faced. A quiet man who didn't need permission to command respect, and a son who had never once asked for anyone to speak for him. That same day, Kendrick's name was removed from all flag student lists. He was no longer under review, no longer being monitored. In fact, his file was quietly marked, resolved, case closed. No one told him he found out the way you find out things at Wellington, through what stops happening. No more pulled asides from guidance. No more awkward glances from security guards. No more administrators sitting in the back of his classes, pretending to be observing the teacher. Just quiet. A new kind, the kind that respected him. In Mr. Dorsey's class, Kendrick took notes as usual, but something had shifted before his presence had been tolerated. Now it was acknowledged Mr. Dorsey asked him to lead a short discussion on the assigned reading. Kendrick said yes, his voice didn't rise. He didn't grandstand, he just asked questions one by one, each more pointed than the last. And for the first time, students didn't just answer, they leaned in. At lunch, he sat at his usual table, but he wasn't alone. A junior named Reese, a quiet kid from the robotics club, sat across from him, then Madison, then two seniors from art history. They didn't flood the table, didn't turn it into a circus. They just joined, because Kendrick's silence was no longer a shield. It was gravity. Meanwhile, Tristan was still under review. His reinstatement hung in limbo. Some parents demanded he return. Others said it would send the wrong message. The board was split. His father was furious. But Tristan, he wasn't talking much anymore. And when someone asked him in passing, "What happened, man?" he just shook his head. They picked the wrong target, then walked away. Later that week, a student club Kendrick had never heard of. The Future Leader Society sent him an invitation. They were hosting a student panel on leadership through adversity. They wanted Kendrick to speak. He stared at the email for a while, then closed it. Didn't delete it, just kept it in his inbox unopened. The next day, he met with Mr. Dorsey after school. "Do you think I should do it?" Kendrick asked, sliding the phone across the desk. Mr. Dorsey leaned back, looked at the screen, then looked at Kendrick. "I think you already are." Kendrick raised an eyebrow. "A leader," Mr. Dorsey clarified. "You don't need a stage to lead Kendrick. You just need a direction." That night, Kendrick opened his notebook. Not the observation one, a fresh one, blank clean. He turned to the first page, wrote one sentence. "Speak when it's yours to say, lead when it's yours to carry." Then he closed the book. Not because he was done, but because he was just getting started. At Wellington Prep, something subtle had shifted. The hierarchy hadn't collapsed, but it had cracked. And through that crack, a new kind of power had entered. It didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't seek applause. It wore a gray hoodie, and it didn't care about your legacy. The next Monday, something strange happened at Wellington Prep. A student-led discussion group on narrative power was announced during morning announcements, not hosted by administration, not sponsored by the Diversity Council, just students. No titles, no rules, just voices. And on the flyer passed out in second period, there was no image, no flashy design, just a line typed in bold. When they write your story, they get to control your ending. So write it yourself, no signature, no organizer listed, but everyone knew who was behind it. That afternoon, Kendrick stood in the center of the library's reading room, where they had agreed to meet. The room had always felt too big for student-led events, too quiet, too formal. But today it buzzed. 24 students showed up. Not just the usual faces, a mix AP kids, athletes, drama, kids, even a few from the culinary program who rarely spoke outside of class. They sat in a circle, no podium, no microphone, just Kendrick and his notebook. He didn't start with a speech. He started with a question. "What does silence mean to you?" At first, no one answered. Then Madison said softly, "It used to mean survival. Now it feels like permission." A senior across the room nodded. "I used to think silence meant respect, like staying in your lane, but it can also be fear, and fear turns into hate." Reese from robotics added, "I think it's both. I used to be proud of not saying anything, but now I think I was just afraid of saying the wrong thing." Kendrick didn't interrupt, didn't lead. He just listened. That was the power. The shift, not control, influence. When the meeting ended, students stayed behind chatting in pairs, exchanging ideas, asking Kendrick if there would be another one next week. He nodded and walked out. Same hoodie, same steps. But now people followed, not to chase him, to walk with him. Meanwhile, Derek Moore sat in his office at home. The same man who had once commanded operations in silence now watched his son reshape an entire culture without ever raising his voice. He opened his inbox, a message from Kendrick. No subject, just a photo. It was the discussion group flyer, and beneath it Kendrick had typed, "You said survival was your mission. Mine is legacy." Derek leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in years, he closed his laptop and smiled without the weight of the past pressing down. Later that week, Kendrick was walking through the courtyard when he passed Coach Daniels from the football team. They hadn't spoken much before, but today the coach stopped him. "Hey," Daniels said, "you ever think about coming out for the team? We could use a mind like yours." Kendrick smirked just slightly. "Nah, I don't tackle for fun." Daniels laughed. "Fair enough," then more serious. "But if you ever want to help build something bigger than a scoreboard, let me know." Kendrick nodded once. It wasn't about football, it was about doors, and the fact that for the first time one had opened without him having to force it. The final shift came Friday morning. Tristan returned to campus. No fanfare, no entourage, no smirk. He walked through the front gates with a backpack slung low and eyes that didn't look for applause. Some students turned. Some looked away. Kendrick saw him across the quad. They didn't speak, didn't approach each other. But when their eyes met, it wasn't war. It wasn't even regret. It was recognition. Two players. Same board game changed forever. Kendrick returned to class and slid into his usual seat. Mr. Dorsey passed back essays. On the cover of Kendrick's, a single comment. "You don't have to raise your voice to raise the room." Kendrick underlined the sentence twice, then closed the folder and looked out the window because this story wasn't ending, it was opening. The hoodie remained, not because he was hiding, but because it was now more than fabric. It was a banner, a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the loudest revolution is the one that walks past you without asking for approval. It didn't happen in one big scene. No explosion, no dramatic announcement. The fall of Tristan Rockford came slow, piece by piece like bricks slipping quietly from a crumbling wall. And the truth is, most people didn't even notice it at first. That's how power works. You only see it clearly once it's gone. At first, it was the locker room the team used to gather around Tristan, like he was gravity pulling every conversation, every decision, every play through him. But now his name didn't echo through the halls. Now the freshmen weren't lining up to sit near him. Now the jokes landed, but no one laughed. He still wore the jacket, still showed up to practice, but something had shifted. His voice didn't command. It requested. And in a place like Wellington, once you start asking, instead of telling, you're no longer leading, you're trying not to be forgotten. Coach Daniels didn't say much when Tristan came back. He gave him a helmet, gave him a clipboard, told him to observe for the first week. Tristan didn't argue, because even he could tell he wasn't being brought back to play, he was being phased out. In the classroom, it was worse. Teachers no longer looked to him for the popular kid opinion, no longer used him to bridge the gap with disinterested students. Now they watched him like a warning, an example of what happens when entitlement outgrows its container. A history teacher even paused mid-lecture on colonial power structures, glanced toward Tristan and said, "Some empires don't realize they've already fallen until the people stop kneeling." Half the room glanced at Kendrick. The other half didn't need to. Kendrick, for his part, said nothing. Always nothing. But his silence was different now. It wasn't a shield, it was a standard. Something people respected. At the next leadership meeting, Kendrick was invited to sit in, Not as a speaker, not as a prop, as a peer. The principal called it student insight. The students called it what it was, a new voice that didn't need volume. When Kendrick walked into the room, Tristan was already there, sitting in the second row, back straight, smile forced. He didn't speak once the whole session, didn't even raise his hand. When Kendrick stood to leave, he passed Tristan without a glance. But Tristan turned quiet and careful and said just loud enough, "Everything's changed now, huh?" Kendrick didn't stop walking, but his reply came smooth without turning. "No, it was always this way. You just stopped hearing it." Tristan watched him go, and for the first time in his life, he didn't know who he was without someone following. Outside, Kendrick walked across the quad. A junior called out, "Hey KJ, you going to the panel tomorrow?" He nodded once, didn't break stride. Behind him, two freshmen whispered to each other, "That's the kid who shut Rockford down." "No, man, that's the one who never had to raise his fists." At lunch, the shift was undeniable. Where once the biggest table belonged to Tristan and his crew, it now sat half full. The seats no longer a throne room, just chairs. Meanwhile, Kendrick's corner table grew. Not louder, just fuller. People didn't crowd him. They joined him. It wasn't fame. It was trust. In ethics class, a group presentation was scheduled. 3 students had to prepare a case study on accountability and power. Kendrick was asked to lead one. He chose a case from early civil rights history, the story of a student who resisted quietly without protest, without headlines, and still changed the law. When he finished presenting, the teacher stood silent for a moment, then said, "History repeats itself." If we're lucky, the class clapped, not loud, just long enough to mean something. That night, Tristan walked past the auditorium. He peeked inside. The room was half full, buzzing with students gathered for Kendrick's second discussion group. He didn't enter, didn't linger, just watched from the doorway for a moment, then turned and walked away. No one noticed him leave. And that was the loudest silence of all. Names carry weight until they don't at Wellington. Prep the name Rockford used to silence conversations. It got you into leadership programs. It excused tardies, erased detentions, opened doors labeled staff only. But now it barely opened mouths. When Tristan's name appeared on a student council flyer, someone crossed it out in red pen. Not out of malice, out of disinterest. During homeroom announcements were read aloud as usual. Student Spotlight this week, Kendrick Moore nominated by 3 faculty members for leadership under adversity. Polite applause followed. Tristan sat 3 rows back. He clapped too, slowly, hands barely touching. No one turned to look at him, and that more than the applause told him everything. Elsewhere, Kendrick walked into the library. He was no longer trailed by whispers. He was met with nods. Respectful, simple, not exaggerated, just the kind of acknowledgement you give someone whose presence doesn't demand attention, but deserves it. The librarian, Miss Patel, stopped him before he reached the back table. "There's a freshman who wants to meet you," she said softly. Kendrick raised an eyebrow. "He saw your discussion group flyer, said he's been feeling invisible." Kendrick paused, then nodded. "Send him over." He didn't ask for the kid's name. Didn't need to. He remembered what it felt like to sit in the back of a room praying. No one noticed you and hating how badly you wish someone would. Meanwhile, the Wellington administration started rewriting policies. Anonymous digital harassment. Now a level 2 infraction, unverified allegations sent through student email lists, grounds for disciplinary review and legal referral. One by one, the systems that once protected the loudest voices were being rewritten. Quietly. And it wasn't just the rules that were changing, it was the culture. In the past, school culture came from the top-down faculty meetings, assemblies, pep rallies. Now it was coming from the ground up. Small things, students correcting each other. "That's not funny, man. Hey, don't record that." "Don't tag him without asking." Tiny interventions, not loud but powerful. Kendrick had never told anyone to do that. He didn't need to. He'd modeled something more durable than dominance. He'd modeled integrity. In ethics class, the final group projects were announced. Kendrick's group picked the topic justice, through restoration, not revenge. Their presentation centered on systems that repair instead of punish. They included a story anonymized about a high school where a student who hurt others was stripped of power, not by exile but by silence. "We didn't destroy him," Kendrick said, standing calmly before the class. "We just stopped listening." The room held its breath. He let that land. Then added quietly, "When you remove the echo, the noise disappears." Mr. Dorsey stood at the back, hands folded, eyes proud. At lunch that day, Tristan sat alone. He hadn't been exiled. No one had screamed at him. No posters had been torn down with his name. But when he looked around, what he saw hurt worse. He was irrelevant. The seat that used to define him had become empty. And not because Kendrick took it, because no one cared to defend it anymore. That afternoon, Kendrick passed by the trophy case in the main hallway. He stopped, stared. There behind the glass was a photo of last year's football team, Tristan front and center. Next to it, a new plaque had been added. It read, "Leadership is not volume, it's presence. No name, no attribution." But Kendrick knew, so did everyone else. He didn't need a frame on the wall. He had something else now, a place in people's decisions, in the way they treated each other when no one was watching. Not because he demanded it, because he earned it without fists, without shouting, with presence, with a hoodie, with quiet, with power. It was raining the morning. Tristan finally spoke to Kendrick again. Not much, just a steady drizzle. Enough to fog the windows, enough to wash the chalk off the sidewalk near the quad where someone had once scrawled, "Hoodie danger" in red. That chalk had faded weeks ago, but Tristan still remembered. He sat beneath the covered walkway, watching Kendrick cross the courtyard in that same gray hoodie. Kendrick didn't hurry. Never did. His steps were calm, even like the rain wasn't worth flinching for. Tristan stood as he passed Kendrick. He called out, just loud enough. Kendrick paused. Turned but didn't speak, not yet. Tristan took a breath, the kind you take when you're not sure if it's the start of a conversation or the end of one. "I never hated you," he said. Kendrick waited. Still silent, Tristan shook his head. "I thought this place belonged to me, that I had to protect it from people who didn't fit." Kendrick blinked once, and now he asked. Tristan looked down. "Now I realize it never belonged to anyone, especially not me." Kendrick didn't offer forgiveness, didn't offer comfort, but he offered truth. "You didn't lose anything I took," he said plainly. "You lost what you built on sand." Then he turned, kept walking. And Tristan, he didn't follow. He just stood in the rain, letting it soak through the seams of a jacket that no longer meant leadership. Just cloth, just history. Inside the school, Kendrick moved through the hallway like something permanent. Students didn't part out of fear. They shifted out of habit, out of respect. Not the forced kind, not the transactional kind. The kind that stays even when you're not in the room. He passed a bulletin board filled with photos from Unity Week, candid snapshots of discussion groups. Student artwork, notes of encouragement. One photo showed Kendrick mid-sentence during a roundtable talk. His hand-lifted eyes locked on the person opposite him. No anger, no drama, just focus beneath it. Someone had handwritten, "Power is knowing when not to speak." No one had signed it. They didn't need to. That week, Kendrick was invited to speak on a panel at a citywide student forum. The topic, redefining leadership in divided spaces. He didn't say yes right away. He thought about it. Not because he doubted his voice, but because he understood its weight now. When he finally said yes, he made one request: no podium, no stage, just chairs in a circle. Back at Wellington, Principal Holloway reviewed applications for the new peer leadership committee. 3 years ago, the list would have been dominated by legacy names, children of board members, donors, alumni. Now the top nominee was Kendrick Moore. No campaign, no posters, just votes. In the gym, the trophy case was rearranged. Old plaques dusted off, new ones added. But something curious appeared one morning. A folded hoodie gray, set behind glass next to a small bronze plaque that read, "Worn by the student who reminded us that silence is not absence. It's choice." Students stopped to look. Some nodded, some whispered. No one laughed because it wasn't a costume. It was a legacy. As spring approached, seniors began preparing for graduation. Tristan filled out college applications quietly. No more interviews. No more quotes in the school paper. When asked about leadership experience, he paused, then typed learning how to listen. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. Kendrick didn't apply for awards, didn't submit essays to win recognition. But one morning he received an envelope in his locker, no return address inside a handwritten note. "You didn't just change the school. You reminded us how to change ourselves." No signature, just the school crest in the corner. He folded the note once, slid it into the back of his notebook, and kept walking. Because that's what happens when a name becomes something more than a label. It becomes a lesson, not carved in stone, but written in how people treat each other long after you've left the room. Graduation was 6 weeks away, but something had already graduated inside Wellington Prep. The air was different, not cleaner, not lighter, just clearer. Conversations that once happened in whispers now took place in the open. Students who once tiptoed around difficult topics now leaned into them, not for credit, but for clarity. And at the center of it, though, never at the front, was Kendrick Moore. Still in his hoodie, still calm, still walking like he had somewhere to be, even when that place was nowhere special. That week, Kendrick was asked to lead the closing speech for the school's Unity program. He hadn't volunteered, didn't campaign, but his name appeared at the top of the student ballot unchallenged. When the principal announced it in homeroom, Kendrick didn't react. He just wrote one sentence at the top of his notebook. Say what needs saying, leave the rest behind. The day of the speech, students packed into the auditorium, not because they had to, because they wanted to. Kendrick didn't wear a blazer, didn't ditch the hoodie. He walked to the mic slowly, set his notebook down, and looked out at a room that had once made him invisible. "I'm not here to inspire you," he began. "I'm not here to be your story of struggle." A few students sat straighter. Teachers leaned in. "I'm here to remind you of what you already know, that power isn't always about who speaks the loudest. Sometimes it's who listens longest." He glanced down at his notes, then looked back up. "I didn't win anything. I didn't defeat anyone. I just stopped apologizing for taking up space." Silence. Not heavy, not tense. Just full. "I wore this hoodie every day because I wanted to remind myself and you that who I am doesn't need decoration." He tugged at the cuff slightly. "This isn't armor, it's comfort, it's mine. And that should have been enough." He paused. "And now, it is." Someone in the back stood. Then another. Then a third. By the end of the minute half, the room was on their feet, not clapping, just standing. Like they finally understood this wasn't about applause, it was about acknowledgement. And Kendrick, he gave one nod, then walked off stage. Later that day, he found a note slipped into his locker. It wasn't signed, just a torn piece of notebook paper with one sentence. "You taught me that I didn't have to shout to be heard." He folded it carefully, placed it between the pages of his own notebook, and kept moving. In ethics class, Mr. Dorsey started the final unit, Legacy. He wrote one word on the board in bold capital letters, voice, then turned to the room. "What's your voice?" he asked. "What does it sound like when you're not trying to impress anyone?" Kendrick didn't raise his hand, but Madison glanced his way, so did 3 others. Because his voice, it had already spoken. Not just through speeches, but in the gaps between them. One morning in the quad, a sophomore approached him, skinny, nervous eyes down. Hey, he said I wrote something for my lit class and I was wondering if maybe you'd read it sometime. Kendrick didn't hesitate. Yeah, he said, drop it in my locker. The kid smiled, nodded, and jogged off. Kendrick stood still for a moment, watching him go. He didn't need to say anything else, because someone had done that for him once, not with words, with space. And now he was giving it back. That's what real power looks like. Not being the center, being the circle others can step into. In the coming weeks, Kendrick's speech was shared online, quietly, organically. A parent posted it, then a student reposted, then a cousin from another school. No virality, no drama, just ripples. Small, real spreading. One comment read, "This isn't a speech, it's a blueprint." Another, "I didn't know how much I needed this until I heard it." And the one Kendrick would remember, "This gave me permission to stop hiding." He never replied to the comments, didn't repost. He didn't need to, because the story had already moved beyond him, and that was the lesson. That's the point. Legacy doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just leaves fingerprints on people, on moments, on choices. And Kendrick Moore had started to see those fingerprints everywhere, not because he looked for them, but because they were beginning to show themselves in the way others acted when no one was watching. It happened on a Tuesday in the cafeteria. Two juniors were mid-argument, nothing major, just loud voices in the edge of a tray knocked over in frustration. One of them, frustrated, muttered under his breath, "I'm tired of this. You're not listening to me." In the past, that would have turned into a scene. But this time, a kid from the next table, someone Kendrick barely knew, stood up and said, "Then maybe we listen first." "You good man." No one laughed. No one filmed it. They just gave the boy space to speak. That was new. That was change. Later that week, Kendrick stayed late after school to help Mr. Dorsey restack books in the back room of the library. It wasn't about extra credit. It was about presence. Funny thing about truth. Mr. Dorsey said lifting a box is that it doesn't always reward you right away. Sometimes it just plants itself somewhere in someone else and waits. Kendrick smirked. "You've been planting things in me this whole time, huh?" Mr. Dorsey laughed. "I just handed you the shovel. You did the digging." Outside the classroom, the ripple spread. Sophomores started their own discussion group. Different room, different name. Same energy, they called it Speak Soft. One of their flyers read, "Not everyone needs a mic, some of us just need room." Kendrick wasn't part of it. He didn't need to be. That's how he knew it was working. Tristan Rockford wasn't gone. He still came to school, still walked the halls, but he moved differently now. More eyes down, more nods instead of smirks, more listening than talking. One afternoon in ethics, he sat 2 seats from Kendrick, didn't say a word, didn't try to reclaim anything, he just learned. And Kendrick didn't interrupt that, because silence, when honest, deserves space too. During a faculty meeting, the vice principal shared a surprising stat. Incidents of student misconduct had dropped by nearly 30% in 3 months. Not because rules had changed, because students had. They're self-regulating, she said. Not out of fear. Out of example, Principal Holloway nodded, and in the corner, Ms. Chambers, the guidance counselor who once asked Kendrick if he felt safe, simply smiled to herself. Back in the locker room, the football team gathered after practice. No one shouted over the music. No one trashed the freshman who dropped his cleats. Instead, one of the captains, newly appointed, said something Kendrick might have once written in his notebook. "Lead by how you carry the weight, not how loud you brag about it." No one questioned it. That was the new rule book. Even in the community, the school's shift hadn't gone unnoticed. A local journalist covering education reform wrote a short piece. Wellington Prep quietly rewrites its culture, led by the kid in the hoodie. The article never named Kendrick, didn't need to. The comments beneath it told the rest of the story. My daughter goes there. She says things feel different now and safer. My nephew used to hate that school. Now he's staying after class for discussion groups. I don't know who the kid is, but I hope he never stops walking. Kendrick didn't read the article. Someone told him about it in the hallway. He just shrugged, then opened his notebook and added a line. When you stop needing credit, you start creating change. One Friday afternoon, just before spring break, a younger student, maybe a freshman, caught up to Kendrick on the way to the buses. "Hey," the kid said out of breath. "I don't mean to bother you, but you're the reason I didn't quit this place." Kendrick turned. The kid continued, voice shaking. "But honest, I wore my hoodie last month. First time ever. Got looks. But I remembered you. And I didn't care." Kendrick didn't say much, just nodded once. Then reached into his backpack, tore a blank page from his notebook and wrote, "You don't owe anyone your silence." Folded it, handed it over, kept walking. Because the lesson had already been taught, the rest was just echo and Kendrick Moore. He wasn't just walking through Wellington Prep anymore. He was rewriting it, step by quiet step. There's a moment in every journey when the walk becomes lighter, not because the road is shorter, but because others are finally walking with you. Kendrick Moore felt that shift long before graduation. It wasn't about popularity. It wasn't about recognition. It was about release. For the first time since he'd stepped onto the polished floors of Wellington Prep, Kendrick no longer felt like he was carrying the whole world on his back, because now others were carrying parts of it too. The school's culture had changed, not overnight. Not because of rules, because of rhythm. Now when someone interrupted a classmate, people noticed. When someone joked about the way a student dressed, the laughter didn't last. When someone looked uncomfortable, another voice would ask, "You good?" The difference wasn't just visible, it was palpable. And Kendrick had learned something beautiful in all that. He didn't need to lead the conversation anymore. He'd already changed the language. A week before finals, Kendrick stood in front of his locker when Madison walked up behind him. "Hey," she said, pulling her hair into a bun. "Did you hear what Mr. Dorsey's doing?" Kendrick shook his head. "He's starting a mentorship program next semester. Pairing upperclassmen with freshmen. Said it was your idea." Kendrick raised an eyebrow. "It wasn't," Madison smiled. "I think that's the point." Later that afternoon, Kendrick sat on the rooftop of the art building, his favorite quiet place on campus. Below him, he could see the quad, the parking lot, even the front gates. He opened his notebook. One last time. Inside were pages filled with names, moments, thoughts. The first entry from months ago read, "Tristan Rockford needs to be seen." Now the final entry said, "Tristan Rockford learned to see." He didn't smile, but his chest rose a little deeper. The next day during a school-wide town hall, Kendrick didn't speak. Instead, another student, Reese from robotics, stood up to address the crowd. "I used to think being quiet meant being weak," he said, glancing toward Kendrick. "But then I saw what silence could hold." He gestured to the crowd. "To every kid who thinks they need to be loud to be heard, watch how change actually happens. You don't have to dominate to lead. You just have to listen like you mean it." Applause followed, genuine. Not thunderous, just steady. And Kendrick sat in the third row, watching, not directing. And that was the lesson. On the last day of classes, Kendrick visited Mr. Dorsey's room one final time. The desk was already half cleared. Boxes of books stacked in the corner. Mr. Dorsey looked up. "You made it," Kendrick nodded. "I wasn't gonna leave without saying thank you." Mr. Dorsey smiled. "You don't have to, but I appreciate it." He slid a small envelope across the desk. Kendrick opened it. Inside, a note. "Legacy isn't what you leave. It's what others do because you were here." Kendrick folded the note, tucked it into his hoodie pocket. That hoodie had never felt heavier or more earned. Graduation came with sun, with speeches, with cameras. with clapping parents and flowers and awkward hugs. Kendrick walked the stage without fanfare, just a calm face, a slow step, a quiet nod to the audience as he took his diploma. No speech, no final mic drop. He'd already said everything he needed to say, in silence, in strength. After the ceremony, students gathered in clusters, photos, farewells, promises to keep in touch. Kendrick didn't linger long. He walked the perimeter of the field past the bleachers, past the gate, then paused one last time. He turned to look at the school, at the place that tried to define him. Then learned from him, he pulled up his hood, not to hide, but to honor. Because this wasn't just a story about a black kid in a hoodie who refused to be broken. It was a story about what happens when you choose presence over permission, dignity over noise, direction over domination. Kendrick walked off the field, back straight eyes forward, and behind him, 1,000 untold stories waited to begin. In his shadow, in his silence. In his strength, summer came quick. Wellington Prep emptied like a river pulling back from shore. Students scattering to internships, vacations, college visits. The once buzzing hallways now echoed with nothing but the whir of janitor carts and the distant hum of waxing machines. But one voice still lingered, not in volume, in memory. Kendrick Moore was gone, but his presence hadn't left. The first day of summer session, a freshman orientation group gathered in the library. Nervous eyes, new faces, some with polos tucked too tightly, others still unsure which corner of their identity to show. A student mentor led them through the campus. His name was Marcus A. Rising Jr. Smart Chill. Wore his hoodie half-zipped in 90-degree heat. He stopped near the sculpture garden. "All right," Marcus said, gesturing toward a metal bench under the trees. "This right here, this is Kendrick's bench." One student raised a hand. "Who's Kendrick?" Marcus smiled. "You'll learn. Not because anyone will teach you, but because the school moves different now, and he's why." Inside the administration office, Principal Holloway reviewed an update from the incoming class. Diverse, engaged, less disciplinary action in the past semester than the school had seen in 5 years. In the notes, one staff member wrote, "Students have become quieter, but in the best way, they listen more. They look each other in the eye. It feels healthier." Holloway leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and whispered, "He did more than any of us." Down the street in a quiet bookstore, Kendrick sat at a corner table. New city, new campus on the horizon. Same notebook open in front of him. He hadn't written anything in weeks. But today he felt something stirring. Not a story, a reminder. He picked up his pen. On the first page of a new journal he wrote, "If you walk with truth long enough, the world starts walking with you." He looked different now, same hoodie. But the way he wore it had changed. It didn't hang like a shield. It rested like a second skin. Still gray, still silent, but no longer a question mark. Now it was a period at the end of a sentence he had written himself. A barista passed by, nodded at him. He nodded back. Nothing big, just recognition. That's all he ever wanted. Not celebration, just space. Back at Wellington, one of the sophomore students pinned a new quote on the board outside the ethics classroom. "Speak only when your silence can't carry the message." Mr. Dorsey saw it. Didn't say a word, but erased the old quote beside it. Some stories don't need to be explained. They're understood through repetition, through echoes. At the bus stop across from Kendrick's new apartment, a group of neighborhood kids were messing around, pushing, shouting, trying too hard to be seen. One boy in particular wore his hoodie tight, drawstrings yanked hard, eyes darting. Kendrick watched. After a while, he walked over, sat on the edge of the bench. Didn't say anything, just sat. The kid glanced at him, then again, finally asked, "You waiting for the bus?" Kendrick nodded. "You?" The kid shrugged. Maybe a long pause. Then Kendrick said, "You don't have to prove anything when you show up as yourself." The kid didn't respond, but when Kendrick stood to leave, the boy loosened his hoodie just a bit, pulled the strings down, and that was enough. Back in his apartment, Kendrick pulled out a letter that had arrived a few days earlier. Wellington Prep's seal on the envelope, inside a thank you. Not from the administration, from a student, anonymous. "I never knew someone could teach me how to be proud of quiet. You did, so now I'm doing the same for someone else. Thank you for starting the ripple." Kendrick folded the letter, slid it into the back of his notebook. Same place he kept all the ones that mattered. He looked out the window. The city was louder than Wellington, faster. More distracted, but Kendrick wasn't overwhelmed. He learned that noise doesn't shake you when you know your own rhythm. He stood, zipped his hoodie, and stepped into the street. No one cheered. No one turned to watch. But if they had, they would have seen a black boy in a hoodie walking like the world didn't need to get out of his way. It just needed to keep up. Symbols don't ask for meaning, they earn it, and sometimes they outgrow the one who wore them first. In the months after Kendrick left Wellington, the hoodie became more than just fabric stitched in gray. It became a signal, a quiet language. One that said, "I'm here, I'm watching, I'm walking my truth." At a nearby public high school across the city, a sophomore named Ayla started wearing her hoodie with the drawstrings tucked just like she'd seen in a video shared by a friend of a friend. She didn't know Kendrick more personally. She didn't go to Wellington, but she'd watched the clip of his Unity Week speech more times than she could count. She'd memorized the part where he said, "I just stopped apologizing for taking up space." And when she walked into her honors government class every Tuesday morning, where no one looked like her, talked like her, or came from where she came from, that sentence played in her chest like armor. Another school, another kid. A boy named Jordan in Detroit sent the video to his uncle, a teacher. Said, "This is how I want to move." His uncle printed it out, hung the quote on his classroom wall. Didn't tell the principal, didn't need to, because that room didn't need more rules. It needed more truth. In a college hallway 3 states away, a professor paused at the sight of a student sitting on the floor during office hours back against the wall. Hoodie over his head, reading a book on race and silence in American history. "You okay, son?" the professor asked. The student looked up. "Yeah, just reading." He held up the book, then tapped his chest. "I'm learning to make room for the right kind of noise." The professor didn't fully understand, but he nodded anyway, because not every message is meant to be explained. Back in Kendrick's new city, someone tagged a mural near his apartment with a phrase that stopped him mid-walk. Big white letters sprayed across cracked brick. "Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy." No name, no artist credit, just the message. He stood in front of it for a minute, then took a photo, set it as his phone background. He didn't post it, didn't hashtag it, but he smiled, because the movement wasn't about him anymore. That same week, Kendrick was asked to speak on a university panel about youth leadership and racial dynamics in modern education. He said no, not because he didn't care, because he wasn't needed on the stage. Instead, he recommended someone else, a girl he'd met through a youth storytelling program downtown. "She already has a voice," he said to the organizer. "She just hasn't been invited to use it yet." The organizer hesitated, then agreed. And the girl, she took that mic and lit the room up. Afterwards, she walked up to Kendrick. "I thought you were going to speak." He shook his head. "You did." Sometimes leadership means knowing when to speak. Other times it means knowing when to step aside. Later that night, Kendrick sat on the fire escape outside his apartment, notebook in his lap. Hoodie pulled low. He'd written only 5 words on the newest page. "It's not about being seen." He stared at them for a while, then underlined the word being. Twice. Across town at a community center gym, a group of kids were huddled after basketball practice. One of the older teens, no more than 17, was talking to the younger ones. "You don't got to talk over people to lead," he said, bouncing the ball slowly. "You just got to know who you are." One of the kids, barely 12, raised his hand. "Like that guy from the hoodie video." The older teen smiled. "Exactly like that." They never said Kendrick's name. They didn't need to because when something becomes bigger than you, it doesn't live in the name, it lives in the echo. It was evening now, the kind of quiet city evening where the streetlights flick on before anyone really needs them. Kendrick Moore walked alone down a narrow sidewalk just outside campus. Head up, hoodie up, notebook, zipped tight in his bag. There was no soundtrack, no voice narrating his thoughts, just the rhythm of his steps on concrete and the occasional whisper of wind through the branches above. And it was perfect. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a story waiting to be judged. He felt like a life already being lived. He passed a corner store where the owner always gave him a nod, the kind reserved for someone who doesn't talk much, but is remembered anyway. He passed a mural of faces painted in every tone from sun to shadow beneath the words, "We built this in silence." He passed a group of kids hanging out on stoops laughing too loud, daring the night to get in their way. He smiled at all of it because it reminded him of where he started. Back in his apartment, Kendrick sat at the small kitchen table, one light on notebook in front of him. He flipped to the last blank page and wrote slow, steady, certain. They feared the hoodie, but the hoodie wasn't the threat. It was the truth beneath it. He stared at the words, then closed the book. For good. That notebook didn't need to grow anymore. He'd outgrown it. Elsewhere, Wellington Prep was preparing for fall semester. The new student handbook featured a section titled Community Culture, Listening, Respect, and Presence. No, it didn't mention Kendrick, didn't use his name, but the words they were his pulled from speeches, from hallway conversations, from the quiet way he used to nod instead of shout. Legacy doesn't need credit, it just needs roots. At a bookstore downtown, Kendrick saw a boy around 14 flipping through a journal near the front display. The kid wore his hoodie half up, brows furrowed, serious like he was searching for something invisible. Kendrick passed him without saying a word, but as he left, he turned back. "You don't need the right words to start writing," he said. The kid looked up. "Just write the truth you've been carrying." Then he walked out and never looked back. 3 days later, Kendrick got a message from an old teacher at Wellington, Mr. Dorsey. Simple text, no punctuation. "You did what they said you couldn't, and you did it without ever raising your voice." Kendrick stared at the screen, didn't reply, just let the words settle like dust after a long storm, because he knew the world hadn't changed because of noise. It had changed because he refused to become what they expected. On the first cool night of September, Kendrick walked out to a bridge near campus. He stood at the center, watched the water roll beneath the steel. The city glowed behind him and ahead of him. Everything, not a future, written for him. A future waiting to be walked into. And so he took a breath, pulled his hood a little higher, and walked. No cameras, no crowd, no credits, just one step, then another. Because that's how change happens, not in speeches and footsteps. They feared the hoodie, but the hoodie never made a sound. It didn't threaten, didn't beg to be seen. It just kept walking through hate, through doubt, through silence, until the world had no choice but to follow. This was never just Kendrick Moore's story. It was a mirror, a reminder that presence doesn't require noise, and dignity doesn't ask permission. He didn't win by being louder. He didn't fight with fists. He didn't wait for someone to hand him power. He became power by showing up, by listening, by never letting the world shrink the truth he carried inside. And now the story continues, in every quiet kid who holds their head high, in every black boy who walks through the world in a hoodie, not to hide, but to own space to exist. Because silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Silence is strength. If this story spoke to you, if you felt the weight of the hoodie, the power of presence, and the need for stories that reflect our quiet strength, subscribe to Silent Power Stories. Share this video with someone who's walking their own road. Turn on the bell so you don't miss the next truth we bring to light. Every story here is more than entertainment. It's a movement. It's a space for the unheard, the underestimated, the unstoppable. And if you've ever felt invisible, let this be your signal. You don't have to raise your voice to raise the room. You just have to keep walking.